um, something we'll get around to and we'll feel nice and good and fuzzy about. That the issue of inclusivity to me is the fundamental fabric of what does it mean for us to be human on this planet? What is the thing that we are to do on this planet? Find it interesting that inclusivity is something that lies at the core of all of our uh, spiritual beliefs. Um, it's something that is um, to me fundamental to some of our spiritual beliefs. Um, Regardless of what your wisdom tradition may be, you've got a relationship to inclusivity. So, in Judaism, what is hateful to you, do not do to others. In Hinduism, the whole world is one single family. In Buddhism, do not hurt others with that which hurts yourself. In Christianity, do unto others whatever you would have them do unto you. A lot of us also know this as the golden rule. In Islam, none of you is a believer until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. So one of the things that we know about inclusivity because of this is very simple. No, um, and I'm getting a lot of ringing in my ear.
I think I tried to disable that just now.
Okay. Um, so one of the things that we know about inclusivity is although it lies at the
Entry
core,
and exit chimes are off.
although it lies at the core of all of our wisdom traditions, it's the one thing that all of us universally ignore. Okay, so it's not something that um, uh, it's something that we know that we hold as a value, but it's something that universally we don't practice. So my work is on those lines, therefore is very specific. How do we, wherever we are, whatever our wisdom tradition is, or not even having a wisdom tradition, how to get to practice this thing called inclusivity? I find it interesting that if you look in the dictionary, you'll find the word exclusivity. You don't find the word inclusivity. Almost like we don't even have a way of thinking about this concept. So what I want to do for the next couple of minutes is walk us through the notion of what inclusivity means. Walk us through what exclusivity means. Watch how it actually plays out in our lives. Watch how it actually plays out in how we interact with each other, how we even interact with ourselves. We actually practice exclusivity. I am separate with our own selves, with our own bodies, um, and so and look at uh, uh, how different a society that we would be living in if we actually practiced inclusivity. So the bottom line definition of inclusivity is we are one. We are um, uh, we are inextricably linked to each other. We have this link, whether or not we know each other. Now, it's really easy, or I should say, sometimes very difficult, but it's relatively easy for me to practice inclusivity with somebody I know. So if you have um, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, and you know the people in there, then of course those wisdom traditions of yes, let's practice inclusivity, let's be inclusive people, all that stuff kicks in. What happens to the people that you know? What happens with the people where it's actually difficult to know them? Language have a different life presentation, you have a different history. So inclusivity happens whether or not you know these folks. I have a quick story around this. Doing a talk some years ago at a church in an area that was not familiar to me. So I had my MapQuest and I was driving my car, and I was driving a little bit slower than I normally do, and I was looking at the MapQuest while I was driving. And it was clear there's another car behind me, and that driver was trying to go faster. When that car had a clearing, he zoomed around me, and as I looked over, this woman who was driving gave me the look, and the look that says, "This guy's a real bozo. He should be pulling over. He shouldn't be hogging up my lanes. I got places I gotta go." I didn't think anything of it, so I continue on, and I find the church, and I walk up to the front door of the church, and the person who is the official greeter for the church was the woman in the car that gave me the look. And she was really apologizing. "Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you the look," and I laughed it off, but I thought it was really funny how, because she didn't know me or thought she didn't know me, she thought it was okay for her to practice exclusivity, for her that I can I can do something to him and nothing happens to me because I don't know this bozo. Um, so, so inclusivity is, yes, you do know all the bozos in the world. And so we're linked to each other, whether we understand each other or not. We're linked to each other, whether we like each other or not. Now, for those of you who have taken uh, some kind of diversity training or cultural competency training, you've heard the word tolerance said often, that we have to learn how to tolerate other people. And I don't want anyone to tolerate me. Actually, I've got lots of friends who tell me that I'm intolerable, so don't even bother trying. Um, that was called a joke, by the way. I'm a really nice guy. But this notion of tolerance doesn't go deep enough into really truly understanding that we are linked, and we are so linked with each other. We are so connected to each other that we are one. Um, there are lots of people in the world who like other people, don't think of those other people as equal to them, don't think of other people as um, even necessarily as human beings. Back in the slavery days, um, uh, when the old slave Sally died, the master cried because this woman raised him. She cared for him when he was sick. He did feel love for this person. He never at any point in time thought of her as a person. He may have cried when she died, but he may have cried when his dog died. Okay? And so he never thought of himself as being linked to this woman. So whether we know each other, whether we understand each other, whether we even like each other, we are linked to each other. So inclusivity is everything that I do to a you comes back to a me in some way. If I recognize that, just think of how our personal actions would change, how our community actions would change, and how our national policy change. We actually thought about and practiced inclusivity. That everything that I do to a you comes back to a me in some way. Um, we tend to, because we practice exclusivity, can beat up on this country over there, but that's okay because they can't beat up on me. May not come back to you in the same way it went out, but everything comes back around. Everything comes back to a center. So so the next question is, if this is what inclusivity looks like, what does exclusivity look like? The definition of exclusivity is we're separate. We're separate from each other, and we're distinct from each other, and nothing that I do to a you comes back to me in any way. I can actually like you, still see you as being separate and actually inferior to who I am. So this allows so this idea of liking each other doesn't allow us to get down into our true feelings around exclusivity, elitism, um, separation, etc. Next point is important. We're not talking about some concept that I dreamt up that sounds really nice that we're going to spend an afternoon, an evening talking about. But exclusivity is the basis for all of the ways in which our society doesn't work. Exclusivity is the basis for all of our isms. So, racism is exclusivity based on race and ethnicity. Sexism is exclusivity based on gender. We start looking at these things, and we can go on. Homophobia, uh, nationalism is exclusivity based on the accident of the piece of dirt you were born on. Okay, and by recognizing that all these different ways that we separate, identify, put down, exclude, etc., all of these ways are based on this core element of exclusivity. That if that we try to heal, for example, racism, and I'll bet a number of you have done the interrupting racism courses and cultural competency courses and things like that. That only gets to a kind or a type or a flavor of this thing called exclusivity. This is like going into Baskin Robbins and taking one of the flavors out and thinking that you've eliminated ice cream. Like, no, this thing has many, many different flavors. And so rather than even trying to tease apart um, this nature of exclusivity, of racism or sexism or homophobia, rather than spending all of that time with that. And you notice that, even though we've been talking about racism for 40, 50 years or so, been talking about sexism for about 40 some years or so, still there. And that's because we haven't cut this tree at its root. And the root of all these things is exclusivity. So let's take a look at how exclusivity, inclusivity are actually hardwired into our being. Before I go any further, I should say exclusivity by itself is not bad. Okay, say that one more time so that we can understand this. Exclusivity by itself is not bad. Very, very important as we are living on this planet for you to be able at various points in time to distinguish self and other. Why we're given a skin. That's why we're given the ability to run away from something that wants to eat us. Okay. So exclusivity is a biological and cultural survival mechanism. Only problem is when exclusivity gets out of hand, when exclusivity starts driving our personal agendas, our community agendas, and even our national agendas. So, for example, exclusivity, the hard wiring of inclusivity, are heart cells. A cell from my heart, put it in a petri dish, put it in a nutrient solution, and that cell will continue to pulse. Okay, let's take a cell from your heart. Reach into the camera. Take the cell from your heart, put it in a petri dish, put it in a nutrient solution, and your cell will continue to pulse. When you bring these two pulsing cells together, they will coordinate their pulsing. Okay, and so it's unclear what the mechanism is that causes this to happen. Is clear is that our bodies want to coordinate with each other. When we talk about our loved ones, we talk about two hearts beating as one. We talk about being connected at the heart. And scientists see this as, oh, that's really sweet, that's really romantic, but there's an expanding body of evidence that says this is more than just a romantic notion, that this notion of us coming together, of our beingness coming together, is very, very powerful. Another aspect of the hard wiring of inclusivity is women's menstrual cycles. Now, if it is well known that if women are in a close-knit social group, in a dormitory or in a workplace, etc., they will start to do their menstrual cycles together. Now, I've always wanted to know, how do y'all do that? Okay, like do you call a meeting and say, okay, bring your calendars, we're going to all figure out what day we're going to cycle on here, okay? Everybody tells me that you don't do that unless you're keeping something away from it, okay? And so this notion of how you do that, we know it's important. Even though we ignore it in this society, we know it's biologically important that you do it. And we know that because you're still doing it. Okay? And so here's another example of how inclusivity is actually wired into your body. Another aspect is our breathing. Okay, you can do an experiment right this second. Okay, test whether or not we have two nostrils, but we tend to have one as the dominant one. Okay, so if you just kind of see which nostril is easiest to breathe out of, I think it's my right nostril right now. Okay, 2 hours I will breathe out of my right nostril, and then it switches to the other one. So 12 times a day, you switch breathing between your nostrils. Now, that is pretty weird, because why would we do that? Now, I don't know why we do that, but I also know that it has deep survival mechanisms. The reason I know that is that we're doing it. Now, if you have a group of people in a close-knit group, over time, they will coordinate that nostril breathing. How we do that, I don't know. Now, a few of you, when you tested your nostrils, it came out even. You couldn't tell one way or another whether one was you were breathing more or not. That's because you're in the middle of the phase switch. So check again in about 10 minutes, and you'll be breathing predominantly out of one or the other. Another aspect, an aspect now of the exclusivity. Well, we're still on inclusivity. Um, is Ugandan mothers and diaperless babies. When I was in Uganda some years ago, I was fascinated by the fact that the mothers would um, had their babies in a backsling, infancy. Child never would foul the backsling. Child would never go to the bathroom in the backsling. So I would ask the mothers, um, how do you do this? How is your baby born potty trained? Okay. And she said, it's really simple. When the baby has to go to the bathroom, I pull the baby out of the backsling, and if it's number one, I hold him in the bushes this way, and if it's number two, I hold him in the bushes, turn him around, hold him in the bushes that way, shake him off, and put him back in the backsling. I said, yes, but how do you know when to take that baby out of the backsling? They could never answer that question. They would then turn the question on to me. They would say, how do you know when you have to go to the bathroom? And I would then turn the question back to them and said, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about that baby over there. They thought that was the most absurd notion in the world, that they were in some way separate or different or 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 excluded, separated from their own child. And to the point that they couldn't even begin to answer the question. So this notion of, and again, it's not just Ugandan mothers. It may be all indigenous women. I just have never heard of an indigenous person, their babies, the baby's wearing diapers. I mean, diapers are a Western invention. Um, so let's now look at the issue of our exclusivity hardwiring. And the principal thing there is our autoimmune system. Something in my body is not Sharif, should be welcomed in as dinner or pushed out of my system completely. And we don't have to think about what that is. We don't have to think about the interaction between my body and the literally trillions of various microbes that are inhabiting my skin, my blood, my gut, etc. Um, I just read something recently that referred to us, us human beings, each one of us as a colony, and that the human part of the colony is the smallest part of the colony. That the other beings that are inside of us outnumber the human cells 10 to 1. So you should be nice to them, and they'll be nice to you. But that process of you are a good microbe, you come in, you are a bad microbe, and this amazing mechanism comes in that gets that out of your body, and it from white blood cells to sneezing to coughing, one way or another, you will expel this being, and that is an amazing and key survival mechanism. Along those lines is organ rejection. You basically have to shut down the immune system in order for you to get an organ transplant of any kind. That your body just basically says, this is me, and that thing that you just put in me is not me, it's got to go. Various levels of tribal activity. Now, one of the things that we know about various cultures in the world is that they can be very welcoming, or they can be brutal in their exclusion of the other. And um, the question is, a lot of the times the question is, what is good for not an individual in the tribe? What is good for this group as a whole? And I put the word tribe in quotes because I'm very uncomfortable with it. And the reason I'm uncomfortable with it is that we begin to think that tribalism are those people over there that um, that they have these weird behaviors and practices. And when we start thinking about that, we're thinking that my behaviors and my practices are the norm. I'm normal, and that makes them abnormal. So, um, it's a I think it's a challenge us to um, to be able to look at our own behavior of our groups as tribal behavior. I'm gonna pause here, and I'm going to let's open the lines for a conversation, questions, comments, thoughts, etc. And see where we go from here. Kathy and Wendy, I don't know how you do that. Um, um, so I
So
am.
basically, people can just, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can, yes.
Okay. So, people can unmute themselves and ask questions. We had an incident here in Portland this weekend. This child, there was a senior prom, and the prom committee had organized a school activity outside the school, and the child was disabled and was in a wheelchair, and the place they decided to have the prom wasn't
Wheelchair access.
yes. I can't seem to talk. It has been, it's like this is just one group, but it's like here we are planning. You plan things and you try to remember everyone, and we still forget. We still forget people who maybe can't hear. We have people that have asked us about, closed captioning on our films. And, what do we do? How do we encompass? I mean, this is, tell me, please.
Oh, yes. So here is the answer to everything, okay? And I hope you're
thank
all
you. I want to know.
So, I think this is a serious issue on a number of different levels. Okay, so let's take it in two steps. One of them is you don't know, and you can't know everything. Okay, um, this is when I'm doing cultural competency work. My cultural competency work is very different from others. I just start with the premise: you're going to do it wrong. Okay, so let's figure out what you do to recover once you've done it wrong. I have been to now 38 different countries. Um, I have been to over 100 distinct cultures. And in every single one of those cultures, at some point in time, I've screwed up. Okay? And you have to, when you screw up, um, you have to figure out how to make this situation better or as good as it possibly can be. And so this gets to my next, the second point, which is um, once you've screwed up, how do you recover? Okay, now here you have a person who can't go to the prom. Okay, um, unless they make some arrangement for actually picking up her wheelchair and doing whatever, picking her up, and we have two different responses. We've got the kind of the liberal knee-jerk response that says everyone has to do everything equally all the time. Okay, and then we have the inclusivity response, which is we are one. How do we handle this? Okay, and um, so if I'll make the 13 of us, this prom committee, sit down with with this young girl, and we say, um, this is what we're looking at. You know, we have a number of options here. We can pick you up. We can and use this space. We can find another space, although you know we don't have the money for another space. We can cancel the entire prom because you can't come. Okay, and if all of us are working with our hearts open, we're going to find another. Um, we're going to find the best thing to do, which is not necessarily the most politically correct thing to do, but it's going to be the best for all concerned. Now, I had this situation come up for me personally, or I should say for my organization, Commonway. At one point in time, we were operating out of a really big house in Northeast Portland, and there were 8 steps to get to the front door. One of Commonway's biggest supporters is a guy who's a wheelchair user, and he wanted to come to the meetings. And I don't, you know, it's like we don't have the money for a ramp. We don't have the money for to hold the meeting at another location or anything like that. And so, you know, we talked and we had an open-hearted connection. And in that open-hearted connection, I said, you know, would it be okay for you if we picked you up? And he said yes. And so I got 2 of the stronger than me people in the room, and they were already primed, and they picked him up and carried him in the room. So we did this over several months, and it just got to be and he was careful enough to have his lighter weight wheelchair, and I thought it was very thoughtful for him. He had like one of the big chairs with the motors and all that sort of stuff in it, but he would bring a lightweight chair so it wouldn't be a burden for the guys who were picking him up. At another point in time, during a meeting, he said, I have to go to the bathroom. I don't have a downstairs bathroom. And I couldn't even get him into my upstairs bathroom. And so I said, what are we going to do? Number 1, you got to go to the bathroom. Number 2, I don't have any facilities. And number 3, I don't even know how you go to the bathroom. He explained it to me. He and I went into the kitchen, took care of what he needed to do in the kitchen, and it actually was a real bonding moment for me. An opening for him to recognize that community doesn't just stop at getting him to the front door. A vulnerable moment for both of us, because I've never, except for my children, I've never helped another human being urinate before, and all of that would have been missing if we had just stuck to the politically correct script and said, we'll find a building, we'll find a meeting space that's ADA certified with the right size bathroom and the ramps and so on and so forth. So the question really isn't how do we conform to all these rules and regulations that I agree with, by the way. You know, I think that wherever possible we should be accommodating. The question is how do we make community, and how out of things that don't work very well, how can we make community that does work? other questions or comments, unmute yourself and say your name, and we will do something about that. So if I'm not hearing anything, I am thinking that everyone is either petrified or satisfied or actually want to go on to another point. And so, um, um, uh, okay, and Kathy and Wendy, you've got to help me with this. I see the My Mood button up there. Um, um, does everybody else have a My Mood button?
As far as I know, everybody has a My Mood button.
Okay, so if you hover over the My Mood button, I think that's a way that you can say to us where you are. And so if you are fine, click on I'm fine, and we will move on to the next section.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear someone.
Oh, good. This is. I'm just curious how you find technology is playing into the inclusivity or exclusivity. Do you find that it's, well, I assume it's helping both, or it's amplifying both. But how do you find it amplifying or engaging the two sides, inclusivity and exclusivity? What's your just general gist before I get into specific questions around it?
Okay. I think it's an amazing two-edged sword, and I think it's cutting deeply in both directions. Okay. I guess the obvious direction is where we are right now. Okay. I mean, we're using this really amazing technology to have a conversation that we would not be able to have if we were not using it. I don't really know where anybody is. I mean, I'm assuming that most of you are from the Portland area, but that may not be the case. You could be calling in from Sri Lanka. You could be calling in from Abu Dhabi. Okay, um, and the technology allows us to have real time and actually face-to-face conversations with each other, and I think that is um, that is really good. And I see. Um, okay, so one of the things is that we have um, this amazing ability, but that same technology allows us to cocoon, to to shut ourselves away into, where's my prop, into a world that's this big, and I'm sitting here and I'm punching buttons, I'm looking at this world this way, and I'm missing the world way. Okay. I was on a bus a few months ago, and I had to be somewhere early, so it was an early morning bus at 6 a.m., something like that. And when I walked on the bus, I spoke to the bus driver. When I paid my fare, I turned around, and I usually try to make eye contact and nod, not necessarily speak, but nod to others. But there was not one person on that bus besides me and the bus driver that were not digitally mediated. There was not one person on that bus that was not somewhere else. And that took away the possibility for us to have the kinds of connections with people that I talked about in terms of inclusivity hardwiring. I couldn't feel people's hearts. Their hearts were somewhere else. I couldn't make eye contact. I couldn't get the juiciness of another human being because they were somewhere else. And on that notion, although our eyes and our heads are filling up, I think our hearts are emptying because of that. I think so I'm obviously a proponent of technology. I've got my my gear on here, etc. But um, I don't think that it's it's universally good or universally bad. I think it's the application, the way that you apply it, that what you choose to do when you are using that technology.
Shane, did you have a follow-up? Because I have another question written by Jason.
No, I'm good. You can go ahead and answer Jason's question on if I come up with something I want to follow up on, I'll come back on. Thank you.
Okay. Sharif, can you see what Jason wrote?
Yeah, you want to read that for everybody else?
What I do to you comes back to me. Sounds great if you believe that already. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't already believe?
um, I think about this from the point of view of you've seen the bumper stickers um, that says gravity. It's not just a good idea; it's the law. Okay. Um, I think there's a law of inclusivity, but I think that we can ignore it, and it doesn't. We don't see the immediacy of the of what we're talking about because we have a tendency that we can avoid it by the way that you cannot avoid gravity. If you say I can fly and you jump out of a window, you find out immediately that you can't fly. So people, in fact, entire nations build their entire foreign policies for hundreds of years on this notion of exclusivity. And we don't recognize that the people that we're excluding in some way, it's damaging to our hearts, it's damaging to our soul, and it's actually damaging to our foreign policy. Um, we think that we have to keep everybody out. We have to put fences around America. We have to have the biggest military in the world because everybody wants to come to this country and get all our stuff, and we want our stuff. Okay, and I don't believe, as Jason is saying, um, um, I don't. There are people who don't believe, just simply don't believe that I'm connected to anybody else. Um, when they find out that they are, they don't necessarily see the the pain that they're going through as being a part of the disconnection. Just like you can't if you see somebody at McDonald's and they're wolfing down a Big Mac, you can't tell them that what tastes so good to them is eventually killing them. People, though, will come to that conclusion, and they are coming to that conclusion more and more. I just think that what we have to do is encouraging them to come to grips with to see where the connections are. And Jason also just wrote, they don't connect with the pain. They deeply don't connect with the pain. But remember, it's not just that individual's problem. There's an entire society that disconnects us from the pain. Okay, so we say to the person that's scarfing down the Twinkies, if you've got digestive problems, if you have congestive heart failure, whatever, we can fix it. So there's no consequence to you of doing these things. So when I'm doing my long course on inclusivity, we spend hours talking about inclusivity with yourself. That this is the first level of inclusivity. Person who's scarfing down the Big Mac, scarfing down the Twinkies, following it up with a couple of gallons of Coca-Cola is not in connection with their own being. We can't even begin to ask that person to connect with another being. A person that is experiencing um, paranoid schizophrenia, who's experiencing other manifestations of internal separation, they can't practice inclusivity with themselves. So part of our inclusivity is being inclusive with understanding our emotions, inclusive with and understanding our physical bodies, either not getting enough exercise or getting too much exercise, um, having an ailment that we either ignore or medicate ourselves from, um, being in touch with our mental, psychological bodies, and then most importantly for this society, being in touch with our transpersonal spiritual bodies. By spiritual, I am not talking about religious. I'm talking about the spirit that the energy and the beingness that transcends this body, that actually keeps going when this body stops. So by looking at those things and by simply placing your awareness on these things and then inviting other people to place their awareness on these things, then you get in touch with the pain. You also get in touch with the joy. Now, most of us, I see people all the time laughing, joking, having a great time, and you look into their eyes and you still see pain because even though they're laughing and joking and having a great time, they have not come into contact with this transcendental joy, with the joy of our being, with with our deep connection and reverence, love for our lives, ourself, for our intimate others, those who we choose to be closest to our communities. Most of us aren't even in a community, okay? Um, and to the earth herself, to all other beings. Um, and when we start looking at all of these ways where in this society we miss inclusivity, we miss making that connection, we start looking at like no wonder our suicide rate is so astronomically high. No wonder of all of the psychoactive drugs that are happening on our planet right now, that are being manufactured, 60% of all the psychoactive drugs, the ones that are to keep us from being depressed, etc., are being consumed right here in this country. Okay, what does it say about who we are and how far removed we are from ourselves? Um, so that would be the um, the um, the context um, in which I would ask someone to come into connection with themselves. I would start with them. I would start with their family. I would start, and if they can't get there, then they've got to do a lot more work. But a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I love my family, I love my church, and everybody else can go to hell," you know. And that's probably a person that's ready to start seeing a larger reality. So shall we? Are there any other callers who are on the line who would like to say something or ask something or?
Yeah, I just want to let everyone know it's close to 6:30, and I didn't know if you saw Jason's final questions. Is that it helping people realize the joy they're missing out on by separating themselves? That kind of sums up what you were saying. Is that it's
Yeah,
joy?
I think it. Yes, I think well, I think it's joy, but I also think it's pain, and we try to separate ourselves so much from our pain. We walk around the world fearful of living. Um, there was I just went to a presentation by a man who calls his name is Stephen Jenkinson, but he's referred to as the grief walker. And what he does is he helps people deal with issues of death and dying, not by trying to manage that issue, but by embracing the issue, by saying, if you embrace this notion, it's not a notion, this is just like gravity, you will die. You are going to die. There's no question about it. It could happen in the next 5 minutes or the next 5 decades, but it's going to happen somewhere, okay? And so by embracing that, you can come to a different level of realization of your living. And Stephen says, if somebody has to tell you that you're dying, you're not really alive. You haven't been alive. You should be able to feel your body, feel your energy, feel all these things. So if you Google the word grief walker, like in suffering, grief walker, and that's all one word, you'll come to both a trailer and then about an hour-long video documentary that was shot on him and his work. It's very, very powerful, very, very moving work. Don't start the documentary unless you've got a box of Kleenex handy. And so the so yeah, it is I think it's something that you need to take a look at. And so Jason was asking, we're talking about helping people to realize the joy that they're missing out on from exclusivity. Yes, you're missing out on joy, but you're missing out on life, on being able to live your life. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
6:30 now, and yeah, if anybody has any questions, is there any last words you'd like to say to us?
Well, what is our time frame here?
There's some people who are willing to stick around until 7, and some people need to leave at 6:30.
Okay. I am. I see that Jason is from Pennsylvania, so it's a little later there than it is here. If you want to, I have another section that I can introduce in about 10 or 15 minutes or so, or we can leave things as they are. It's a concept that relates to the question of inclusivity, and it has to do with the idea of deep identity and deep conflict. So I see one vote in our chat section for continuing with the process, and so unless I see some chats that say, no, Sharif, shut up, I'm going to go on to see. Okay, they're rolling in positive for the next section. Okay, so let's move on to this notion that I developed some years ago of deep identity, deep contact, deep conflict, and deep connection. So the question is, what is deep identity? There are different kinds of identity that you have as a being. Okay, I could ask that. I ask you what your political affiliation is. I can ask what your how you voted in the fluoride issue. I can ask if what's your favorite sports team. If before you were a resident of Oregon, was there some other state you were a resident of? All these are ways in which we identify ourselves. But there's certain aspects of our identity that are deeper than those. These are aspects of our identity that we acquired before we acquired the capacity for rational thought. Okay, so that The child psychologists say that we develop the capacity for rational thought somewhere around 7 or 8 years old. Some of us are earlier, some of us are later, but that's around the time when we get the ability to do rational and abstract thinking. But before that, almost all the aspects of your identity were already in place. So you developed an identity before you could think about it. And those are the aspects of what I call deep identity. So let's go through them really quickly. I say there are 5 aspects of deep identity. The first one, race, ethnicity, and culture, you know right from the very beginning, I'm cheating. You know that race is different from ethnicity, and ethnicity is different from culture. But when you're 2 or 3 years old, you don't know that. All of this is mixed up inside of us in a stew, and we formed our ideas around race. So we formed our ideas around ethnicity, culture, etc. We formed those ideas before we could think about them, and generally we took those ideas, whatever our parents were thinking, that's what we started thinking. Okay. The second aspect of deep identity is language. Now, when you were growing up, you said, these people. You didn't say to yourself at 4 months old, these people purporting to be my parents are speaking English or whatever the language was in your home. But I know that the majority of the people on the planet speak either Hindi or Mandarin Chinese. So it's okay if they speak English, but I'm going to speak Chinese. You didn't do that. You spoke the language or languages of the adults that were around you. And if you didn't get more than one before you were 7 or 8 years old, the likelihood is that you never got another one, despite high school French class. And language is, on our planet right now, a very deep separator. It's a way of disconnecting from others. Class. The side of the tracks that you were allowed to live on, the schools that you were allowed to go to, all of these things are aspects of the class you were raised in. Class in this country tends to be subtle. Most of the things that we call racial incidents are really class incidents in disguise. Class incidents get worse and worse, and mainly because we don't have a language in our society of how to deal with them, because we have a mythology in our society that that this is that everyone has exactly the same opportunity. So if somebody's living on the street, it's only because they're lazy or crazy, and because we have this story going, we can't get at what the real issues are. The fourth aspect is religion, and many of us were raised in a religion. Okay, we were practicing it well before we had the ability to actually understand what we were doing. And in many cultures, the clothing that you wear as a child is dictated by your religion. And that gives kids who are not part of your religion a prime opportunity to pick on you. And the final aspect of deep identity is gender. You were brought home from the hospital. You were wrapped in a pink blanket if you were a girl, or a blue blanket if you were a boy. And at that point in time, people started separating you. People interacted with you differently. And right now, if if an adult can't identify the gender of the child that they're talking to, they don't talk to them. So children You see, like a lot of babies are born bald, and the parent will put a pink bow or a blue something on that child to identify the child so that the speaker will be comfortable acculturating that child into the culture of this society. And they get very, very twitchy if you're encountering a child where it's not clear what their gender is. When you look at these 5 aspects of deep identity, when you look at race, ethnicity, and culture, when you look at language, look at class, look at religion, look at gender, I want you to look at how many of the world's wars are involving one or another of these aspects of deep identity. When you see the wars that are happening on our planet right now, the Carter Center, the President Carter Center, is tracking 100 wars happening on our planet right now. And most Americans can't name more than 4 or 5. And we can generally only name the ones that we start. Okay? And so all of these, the rest of these 100 wars have some combination of race, ethnicity, culture, language, class, or religion. And all of them have a disproportionate impact on women. Women and children are the bearers of these global conflicts. It was at one point in time the soldiers, the people who had agreed to fight each other, who were the ones that were getting killed in wars. No more. Okay. Back in the battle days, or the more battle days, the wars would happen out in somebody's cornfield, and they'd leave the cities alone. And they'd leave the cities alone because they knew women and children were in the cities. Now, we target them. We want to hurt the other side, so we hurt them where it hurts the most. So when we start looking at these aspects, what we're looking at are deep identity wars. And because the wars are based on deep identity, you can't get at them. You can't ask people to be rational about what they can't be rational about. Okay? You can't ask a person to think about what they got before they were able to think. And so if we had another couple of hours, I would show you this methodology that I use to help people tease away, to take just the first baby step back from their own race, ethnicity, and culture, their own language, their own class, their own religion, and their own gender, to begin to see that as just another cultural aspect, something to be that's interesting, something to be celebrated, something that should be part of your identity, but not something that is worth killing others for or being killed for. And if we can do this, if I can treat these aspects of deep identity as I treat my identity as a citizen of Oregon. Well, I'm a citizen of Oregon. I really like this state, and I can move. I can move right over there to Washington. If we hold these things just a little lighter, then we can start to begin to understand how these really are aspects of identity and not reality. We tend to treat these things like reality. I'm going to stop on the next couple of notes here and ask for questions or comments. We notice that there's this border dispute, and the border dispute is at our southern border. And we have, we're talking about putting walls, dogs, police, guns, etc. at the southern border. Why don't we do that at the northern border? Why don't we keep out these crazed, bloodthirsty Canadians? Okay. Now, it has to do with deep identity. When the average American looks at the average Canadian, they don't see a different ethnicity and culture. They don't see a different language, and that's probably the one key factor. Um, it's not visible that they're in a different class or a different religion or different gender, etc. So their deep identity aspects are not being triggered. How many of you have been in a situation where you are in a group that is speaking another language? People around you are speaking another language, and you can't understand what they're saying. And how comfortable did you feel in that situation? Okay. If you are like the average human being, you're not very comfortable in that situation. Okay. And you're not because there's something in the back of your head saying, they're talking about me, and they're saying unflattering things about me. And actually just by knowing a language, they know something that I don't know. Now that's pretty heavy duty stuff. When I do my work in other countries, and if there's others who come with me to work with me, one of the first things that we do is, if you hear people speaking another language, make the assumption that they are talking about you and they're saying something positive, they're saying something uplifting, they're trying to figure out how to be your friend. Okay. A lot of times that works. Sometimes it gets a little tricky. So each one of us, because each one of us has a deep identity, each one of us has to deal with this issue of deep identity on the road to inclusivity. Now, for many of us, we don't deal with the issue of deep identity because we manage to be around people who share our identity. So you don't have to think about your identity. It's only when something happens, you come across someone speaking a different language, you come across someone who is obviously of a different class. This is why people get so upset around people that we identify as being homeless, because it triggers our otherness, and we want to separate from them, and actually we want to make them wrong. We want to make them wrong or bad or in some way um, not like self. Um, and so how much of this so-called cultural divide that we have in our country is simply because I want everyone to act normal, and that means act like me. And if you're not acting like me, and conservatives are guilty of this, and progressives are guilty of this. Everybody on the spectrum is guilty of this. If you're not acting like me, you're abnormal. And what we have to do is start to recognize that there is a larger perspective. And the larger perspective comes from creating a world that works for all. Now that's the mission statement of my organization. It's also the title to my book. So I have a book Creating a World That Works for All, and it talks a lot more about inclusivity than we've talked about here. So looking at the time, we've got time for a few questions. A few questions if I give my answers shorter. So is there anyone on the line who is ready to ask a question? I see I've got one in the chat box also. Jason is asking the question, does this mean that cultural exchange programs for youth is a great idea, helping youth volunteer in other countries? I agree with that. I would also put middle-aged people in there, and I'd also put elders in there. We need anything that gives us the experience of the other in a relatively safe environment. Okay, when I say so cultural exchange programs in other countries is a great idea. Cultural exchange programs in your own city, taking the kids from the east side of the city to meet the kids on the west side of the city. Okay, taking the kids from the rich high school to meet the kids at the poor high school. I know a person who very proudly said to me that they had spent like $1,500 to go to Hawaii to swim with dolphins. And I said, did you spend like $1.50 on the bus to ride across town to swim with little black kids in the community swimming pool? They looked at me like I was crazy. It's like, you're willing to do interspecies communication, and you're not willing to communicate with your own species. Okay, and so that becomes something that we need to address. To how do we turn what's happening every day into the kind of experience that I'm expanding inclusivity? How can you be in line at the supermarket and look at the person in front of you and the person in back of you and start a conversation with them? And if that person in some way is not like you, all the more reason to do so. I see there are a couple of other questions coming up on the chat. And this is one that says it's private to the presenters, but it's a good question. I'm not sure, Raj, if you meant it to be private to me. I'm going to go on to Britta's question, and you can chat again whether or not you want that to be a private question or not. Britta says, how does a sense of place affect deep identity? Very deeply. The sense of place may be maybe even the sixth aspect of deep identity. Where you are, the geography of where you are, the history of where you are, all these things are an aspect of your deep identity. This is especially true for people who are living indigenous lives, and I would we call them in my book the keepers, those who keep to the sacred ways. That from a Western point of view, one piece of dirt is pretty much like another. From an indigenous point of view, from the keeper point of view, this piece of dirt is unique. It's where the bones of my ancestors are buried. I am an integral part of this landscape, and I cannot be removed from it. And if I am removed from it, it cuts into my soul. That can go too far. It's like, I'm not going to allow anybody else. I'm going to have this piece of dirt exclusive to me. I'm not going to allow anybody else in there, and I'll kill anybody who tries to come into my sense of place. And so we have to have, so it's another one of those two-edged swords in this situation. We have to have a way of addressing a need for a sense of place. And many of us are disconnected from a sense of place. But we also have to have that need satisfied in such a way that it just doesn't feed into people's exclusivity. So Raj's question relates to this question of a sense of place. So Raj asks, what are the ways in which you work with tribal issues? Well, first of all, I think all issues are tribal. I think the issues between the United States and Russia and China are tribal. We talk about it in terms of this geopolitical and ideological, etc. But basically, we are us, and those people over there are them, and we don't like them. Let's bring it down to what we would tend to call a tribal situation, and look at that tribal situation from the point of view of deep identity. Um, if if the tribes, if these community groupings, if these identity groupings are sort of similar to each other, then there's this possibility, there's an easier possibility of them blending together than if they're very, very separate from each other. So I was doing some work in Nepal a couple of years ago, and I was working in a village outside of Kathmandu, and the village is at the top of a hill, and from the top of that hill, you could see another hill a couple of miles away where there's a village at the top of that hill. And the people I was connecting with there, pointed over to the other hill and said, that hill is so geographically far away, we've never been there. And because we've never been there, that's a separate culture. They actually, I mean, they're 5 miles away and they speak a different language. They actually look different, okay? Now, they're not so different that if you did bring them together, they'd be able to find some common points, maybe some common linguistic points, etc. But that is how profoundly this issue of different identity groups, different tribal groups, actually works. What we need to do is, and again, in 4 minutes I can't even begin to get at this, and I've been dealing with this issue a lot in the world. I spent on and off. I spent 17 years in Sri Lanka working with the Sinhalese and the Tamils and the Muslims in this ethnic, linguistic, class, religious war that went on for 30 years because the parties couldn't get a handle on what was the force that was driving the war. And the thing that was driving the war was exclusivity. And everybody would take it into they say, this is a religious war. No, this is a language war. No, this is an ethnic war. This is a political war. It's like, yeah, it's all of those things, but we have to look at it from its foundational point. This is a deep identity war. And I would say that most of the wars happening on our planet right now are deep identity wars. I don't know if we've got time for another question, Kathy. I'm going to hand it back to you and see how you want us to wind this up. One of the things that frustrates me doing all this is we're just touching the tip of an iceberg. It'd be really nice for us to be able to spend not just one evening for a couple of hours together, but for us to spend some time doing maybe a multi-day, multi-week seminar series, so we can look at each one of these things in more depth than me skating across them right now.
Well, thank you for what you were able to do in lovely skating in only an hour and a half. So, and I know you already told us that you're willing to do additional webinars in the fall. So we'll look into that as a possibility. And thank you to everybody who is here and who has managed to find a way to create a little a circle among ourselves, even though we can't see each other. And I don't even know if you can see each other's names. There's just basically been about 14 of us at, when we were the most, and now we're still this a group of interested people who are really going to, with our sensitivities, make that world a better place, especially with this, like a deeper understanding of deep identity and inclusivity and exclusivity, and just even noticing where that's happening in our lives. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting. If you have any further discussion, just it will have to be by email. Many blessings.
I think, yes, indeed. Thank you, and blessings.